Hello, I'm Dahl Russell, and I am talking today about the suite of dances from the opera Platee by Jean-Philippe Rameau, who lived from 1683 to 1764. I will start off with a warning that I am a fan of Rameau's music and I could wax poetic about him for several hours. Instead, I will recommend a hefty book if you really want to know about his life and work. Jean-Philippe Rameau, His Life and Work. It has been considered the definitive work on both his life and work, published in 1959, revised and expanded in 1967. It is still considered a primary source, and it is by Cuthbert Griddlestone. How's that for an antiquarian name? For many years, and in this book, the early life of Rameau was considered mostly a blank until he was 40, and many people in his lifetime did not live to the age of 40. His first opera, Hippolyte et Aracide, was not performed until he was 53, and it was so unpopular that it was rewritten and re-premiered 9 years later. And the opera which really brought him to fame, which remains his most popular opera, still appealing and regularly produced today, Les Indes Galantes, the Gallant Indians, or Indians in Love, was premiered when he was 56. I will mention that in 1734 was when that was premiered, and there was a popular fascination with the New World and the Indians, in quotes, from America, but the Indians of this opera span basically any Eastern or foreign culture, as at that time they referred to any exotic peoples as Indians. So it also includes Aztecs and Persians, and that diversity of locale within the opera is part of its enduring appeal. With the advent of travel becoming more common and the internet, libraries putting resources online, the information on Rameau's early years has expanded a great deal, and I recommend a chatty and concise read about him on Britannica Online. To be fair, in the 1950s and 60s, the interest in Baroque composers was almost non-existent. It was only about the time of the second edition in the late 60s that the interest in historic performance practice and music was gaining popularity. Since then, there have been an explosion of articles and doctoral dissertations from which we and the Britannica have benefited and gained more information. But given all of that, I will say the information about his life is still not much more than a basic outline. Rameau's father was an organist, and he wanted his son to go into the law. His grammar and writing were so poor in his teens that they were a public joke, including a joke made of his love letters. It became clear that his talent was for music. He adored the playing of Louis Marchand, and I do have a performance of one of Marchand's preludes on my YouTube channel with a brief biography of Marchand. Marchand was an organ superstar, and Rameau referred to his youthful trip to hear the great organist play as the highlight of my life. He does not seem to have been instilled with a great ambition as an organist. His year of study in Italy was spent in Milan, which was not considered a great musical capital, and a year later he returned to France and played in a variety of churches for several years. At the age of 25, he published his first book of harpsichord pieces, a collection that is still highly regarded today and used as pedagogy alongside works of his contemporaries Bach and Couperin. He did not set Paris on fire with his playing. Instead, he received something much worse than praise or censure, just a yawn. At the age of 30, he was back in his home region, and he signed a contract to be organist for 29 years. This has been referred to as rash, but for an organist of 30, who has been bouncing around in short-term engagements, the prospect of a stable job for 29 years must have been very appealing. Here in the provinces, his worth was recognized. It gave him the stability to do what he really wanted to do, and what we now recognize as his talent, compose and to write about music theory. He published a treatise on music theory, which was considered very controversial at the time. His concepts of music being based on harmonic principles is foundational to the precepts of music theory that are still taught today. Given the timetable, it's clear that he also must have been submitting his operas to the Paris Opera during these years as well, and his success there would have made him anxious to cut his ties in the provinces and get back to Paris. Also, after about 10 years, he had grown tired of his job, and I'd say most of us know from experience that 10 years is about the time one feels you've hit the wall and done all you can do in any one job. But he had that long-term contract. Rameau was known for having an ill temper, and he decided to fight. Now, along with his harmonic precepts, Rameau and other Baroque contemporaries like Baltimore had been tinkering with dissonance, usually for dramatic effect, but these were and are dissonances worthy of any contemporary deconstructionist. Armed with this knowledge and his playing ability, he proceeded to play dissonant works every Sunday until he was released from his contract. And then his final goodbye, he was said to have played with such sweetness that they really understood what they were losing. Of course, it seems to me they knew all along. They didn't want to let him go. But we don't always stay where we are most appreciated, do we? And certainly in retrospect, he had to have recognized that it was the stability of that job which had given him the springboard to focus on the bigger works which now called him. And now we are up to his 40s, where he steps out and becomes known on a larger stage. Sources now agree that he married in his 40s and had 4 children. This must be more recent research because his earlier biographies do not usually mention this. She was a singer and musically gifted, 20 years younger than he, and it was said to be a happy marriage. Frankly, when reading biographies of composers' marriages, when they don't have much to say, that's usually what they say. It's a happy marriage because they don't have any evidence to the contrary, and they usually don't have much to be found at all. And indeed, there's almost nothing to be found about his wife. Actually, it is also known that he spent the majority of the next 20 years in the home of a noble family as their working guest and in-house composer and performer, with little mention of his family, but it would have been usual for the wife and children to also be housed for a live-in musician. They remained married until his death. He was known for having a short temper and not speaking well, in addition to his poor writing. So when he and Rousseau began to have a theoretical disagreement, he suffered from the mismatch. It was very public, and he lost his patronage. But due perhaps to his having been very miserly, he had enough money to move and for the family to survive frugally. Because Rameau lived to his 80s, which was very, very old in those days, twice the lifespan of the average person, he became the butt of jokes. In his old age, his operas were dismissed as operas of old harpsichord songs, and he did retread his music from harpsichord pieces into his operas, but that was very common. Had he died younger, he probably would not have lived to see his works dismissed and diminished so easily, and to see them fall out of favor as the classical period took hold. But the suite of dances from the opera Platee, today's music is from his prime and the height of his popularity. We have to remember that the saying about the Baroque period in France was, "The French love to dance, and they do a lot of it." Harpsichord suites in the Baroque period were based on a common structure of dance music. This was true throughout Europe, but while in other countries these suites may have included preludes and other non-dance forms, in France they were dance suites, often with no prelude, but instead opening with an allemande, a grand entrance dance. This was true of French opera as well. There were many pauses for dance. In the operas of Louis and Rameau, often one half of the score is made up of dance pieces. Platee is a fanciful and truly delightful comic story of a frog princess who falls in love with a god and believes that he has fallen for her. Scratch the surface, and the misogyny is very evident in the storyline, as Platee is considered to be so ugly that she is the butt of every joke. The character was written to be played by a man. It's a high tenor role. But the fanciful setting with talking animals makes for great stagecraft, and music herself arrives for a star turn to sing on behalf of the lovelorn Platee and to make her the butt of more jokes. As I said, French operas could be half dance music. So it's very common for the dances to be pulled out of the opera score and played as an orchestral suite, a suite of dances as we will hear today. Feel free to tap your toes. I put a link to that suite of dance music, and I've also included another link to my own interpretation of the air grave from Rameau's opera Zoroastre. Now, the air grave, as you would suspect, is supposed to be very slow, grave. But when it's played within the opera, it is usually speeded up. It is another dance piece, and it's usually played 2 or 3 times faster than grave, and that is for performance reasons, in which is, if it were taken grave, it would lengthen an already very long performance. So the standard performance norm within the opera is to play it very fast, but my recording takes it closer to the grave tempo that was intended. So I hope you enjoy both of these performances of dance works in the links. Thank you.